the scope of this update doesn't even touch the recreation element, just for everybody's awareness. We're really talking about open space and conservation. So we'll dig into, as we get into more of the presentation to this evening, we'll get into the specifics on what's in the update. And I think I'm supposed to hand it back to you, because we're going to talk about the outreach today.
Yeah.
So, great.
So as I mentioned a couple minutes ago, an important part of a planning process like this is community outreach. So informing community members that the update's happening, what it's about, and then importantly is soliciting input along the way that the team considers in the technical studies that they do, as well as considers as they put together the recommendations, which in this case are the very specific updates to the element itself. So just to give you some information about the outreach that's been conducted. So we started back in April of last year, and there's a project website that was set up, and on it is people can sign up for announcements and updates. It has information about the planning process for the resource management element update. And then we found really effective, because sometimes doing community outreach is an adaptive process where you kind of see what's working and what doesn't. And what we found started working really well was setting up a booth at events where a lot of people were, and giving information, and then hearing some feedback and some ideas, and actually being out where people are congregating. So you can see the list of different events we were at. And then we had a community workshop last April, and then we have the community workshop today. And of course, a big part of the community involvement for the planning process is having the draft available for public review and comment. So some of the things we heard in the outreach, these things are not going to be as much of a surprise to you, I think, but we heard that many community members use the open spaces here in Encinitas on a weekly basis, sometimes even more often visiting. So it's a really, it's an important part of people's lives here. And we heard that popular and well-loved spaces include Manchester Preserve, Santa Leja Lagoon, Cottonwood Creek Park, the Encinitas Community Park. And then we heard a lot about the trails and canyons, and people using these spaces and the trails for biking, walking, or experiencing nature and just experiencing quiet. We also heard comments about people appreciating the biodiversity and the nature here in the city, and interest in native plants, large trees. We heard a lot about the importance of shade in open spaces, and about wild and restored areas. And then we also heard different suggestions for improvements, like adding bathrooms, picnic-friendly green areas, better trail access, and inclusive recreation opportunities. So these are just very high-level themes from the input that we heard from people. And now I hand it back to Eric, who's going to do a little bit more of a dive into the element itself.
Yeah, let's do it. So you heard me talk about those 4 themes, so I'm kind of going to just give you an overview of what the laws actually ask local governments to do around those topics. So Senate Bill 1425 had 3 new requirements for the open space element, and one was equitable access to open space. And oh, okay, this is an older slide. They really asked local governments to look at access, providing equitable access to open space to all residents in a manner that considers social, economic, and racial equity correlated with the environmental justice element or policies in the general plan as applicable. So for the city of Encinitas, that kind of means a wide range of users. We don't have environmental justice communities mapped under state law here. It's a little bit of a different kind of a community, but we still want to make sure that there's underserved communities or people who don't have access, maybe geographic proximity, or there are barriers to certain areas of the community, that we are providing equitable access to those open spaces. So that's really what that part of SB 1425 is about. Rewilding is interesting. That's the first time a rewilding requirement has been put into planning law in California. And if you know anything about ecology or conservation, rewilding is about bringing back wild species or habitat that we have traditionally lost. And a lot of times it's centered around the needs of sort of apex predators or other species that sort of bring back a rewilding element. But the way that the state law for SB 1425 defined it is actually quite broad, and it says opportunities to preserve, enhance, and expand an integrated network of open space to support beneficial uses such as habitat, recreation, natural resources, historical tribal resources, water management, and aesthetics. And it could also mean establishing a natural communities conservation plan for coordinated mitigation of the impacts of new development. So wow, what a definition. That's pretty broad, right? So it's a little bit different if you look up rewilding on like the Rewilding Institute website, you'll get a very different definition. I see a hand go up.
Yeah, well, I'm looking at the text itself, and I would actually kind of describe it a little bit differently than you're describing it, because it says rewilding opportunities correlated with the land use element, and then it says rewilding opportunities may include but are not limited to the following.
Yeah.
So
Right.
it's not necessarily telling you what the specific outcome is, right, for what rewilding looks like. It just wants you to think about it somehow
Exactly.
in context,
So
right?
locals have a lot of discretion on which path you want to choose.
Thank you.
And then the climate resilience definition is quite basic, and it says address climate resilience and other co-benefits of open space correlated with the safety element. So that's all it says. It doesn't give you a whole lot of guidance. Now, there was a whole series of safety element requirements that were put into state law in 2015 under Senate Bill 379, where there are a lot of expectations for how local government looks at climate change and the safety issues or the long-term impacts of climate change. So the city has already done a safety element update 2 years ago. A vulnerability assessment was done and climate adaptation and resilience policies are there. This law comes around and says, now we want you to address these issues in the open space element, but not without a whole lot of specificity. So for the city, we really want to, as we talk with staff, we really want to take a look at what it means to build resilience or enhance ecosystems in ways that can address vulnerabilities that maybe the safety element didn't do a deep dive on what happens in open spaces, right? And so here, there's an opportunity for the city to look at climate resilience issues in the context of the open space element and looking at things like beach nourishment, beach stability, bluff stability, use of drought-tolerant or native plants, incorporating green infrastructure. So those would be more sort of the climate responses or the climate resilience responses that we might think about in terms of the open space element. The last piece is habitat connectivity, and it's in Assembly Bill 1889. That one gets a little bit more into, it's somewhat related to rewilding, in that we're thinking about how species move through a community or through a region. So it's, what are the habitat that they need for movement or migration? A lot of species need very large habitat ranges. The mountain lions, for example, need hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of habitat range, whereas a very small rodent may not need a whole lot, right? So there's a lot of different needs in species. Deer migration is different than, let's say, a butterfly, right? So we understand habitat connectivity often in terms of vegetation, and that's really important. For some species like fish, of course, it's the water bodies. But you get the idea that the law does ask local governments to look at existing and planned land use in the context of what species are using in the area, and then to look at opportunities to remediate maybe existing barriers in a community to wildlife and habitat connectivity, and then thinking about the impacts of development that could cause or bring new barriers to habitat connectivity. So anyway, that's just a quick overview of AB 1889's requirements for the conservation element in particular. So all these, of course, do apply to this current focus update. And so what we've done as part of our process is we spent a few months working with staff of documenting a lot of existing policies, programs, ordinances, and even the city's current resource management element. Really understand what's on paper now. What do other plans say? What do other ordinances or other initiatives already underway are doing to address these issues? So we took a look at a lot of that, and I'll show you a slide momentarily that the city is already doing quite a lot. So that was kind of encouraging and something to celebrate, that there's been a lot of progress made on a lot of these issues, but the city could always do more. Or maybe the general plan was just sort of silent about some of these issues, but a lot of work's already being done kind of at the program level, with not a lot of specificity in the general plan about those issues. So, so we sort of did a gap analysis to understand, whereas the general plan maybe could do a little more or just silent on some of these issues. And so we started to document that. We put that out in an existing conditions, issues, and opportunities report that was published concurrently with the public draft of the element that's online today. So you're welcome to go and take a look at that, as well as the public draft of the policy document update, which will just give you a high-level overview of tonight. The public review draft did go out a few weeks ago. I think it was the last week of January. So it's been out for a few weeks for public review. And so we're just now kind of getting the outreach going and making sure that folks know about it, and want to give you an overview of what's in the plan. Let's talk about what's already happening in the community. Oh, my slide did not get in there. It's okay. Well, it's going the wrong way. Oh, I'm pushing the wrong button, that's why. I'm used to a clicker. Sorry for the awkwardness here, everybody. So, okay, let's talk first of all about equitable access to open space. And, the city is already addressing equitable access to open space in many ways. There's a lot of opportunities already in trail systems that are out there in the community in terms of opportunities to have, promote physical activity. There is a lot of access to public lands and facilities. We have Lagoon Preserve, the San Elijo Lagoon Preserve, plenty of public beaches with public access, a lot of great access to a lot of open space today. And I guess the question on the table as we did our analysis is, where are the barriers? Are there areas that are underserved, or where there's little connections that just seem to be missing? And of course, there might be a few areas out there, but a lot of work has been done already to make sure that we have equitable access out there. So that's good news. And really, the substance of the policy, really, as we think about an update to this element, is who really is underserved? Or are there cultural barriers, linguistic barriers? Are there people that really just don't feel welcome in some of the spaces, even though we might have the physical ways to provide access? So this is sort of some of what we uncovered, and maybe there's programming level decisions that could be made to address some of those issues. There is a new policy, and if you are a reader, you can go to policy 8.8. It's a new policy that we recommend in the draft we added to the general plan to promote the maintenance of safe, wide, and publicly accessible beaches within the city. That's something where already great progress has been made, but there could always be more to be done. There is a whole new goal added to the end of the element. It's goal 16 that does focus on equitable access, and you'll find a few policies that really focus on expanding and improving equitable access to high-quality open space, nature, and recreation opportunities for all. So, it's broad. It's a general plan level policy. The city has a lot of flexibility in terms of how that gets done, whether it's in developed open spaces, undeveloped open spaces, and so forth. All right, let's go on to the next topic. Climate resilience. You heard me talk earlier about the safety element. So, climate resilience, if you aren't really familiar with the term, it's about the ability to anticipate, prepare for, respond to, or recover from hazardous events that are related to climate change. So that safety element was updated a few years ago. It does address existing vulnerabilities like sea level rise, extreme heat, drought, wildfire, flooding, and then even issues like water scarcity, right? So these are all issues. We know climate change, these are seasonal events, hazards are already happening, but climate change is going to make these events probably worse and somewhat more frequent. So the science is clear on that, and of course the update does now focus on, and when we think about the open spaces, the undeveloped areas, what are ways the city could advance climate resilience in those spaces, while also recognizing those spaces already really provide a lot of value for habitat and for people today. We want to make sure that we're protecting them the best we can. So again, examples of how the proposed resource management update protects or promotes climate resilience could be things like green infrastructure projects, rain gardens, bioswales, beach nourishment. The city already does work a lot with state agencies on those marine protected areas, and I'm sure there's policies already in the resource management element that supported that and promoted that, so that's not changing. The city has a climate action plan, so some of what's in the climate action plan reinforces some of what's already in the resource management element, but we do have policy recommendations that we are bringing forward through this update to really up the ante on water efficiency and conservation, thinking about enhanced nourishment projects, thinking about sea level rise getting worse over time. There's not going to need to be an evolution of strategy. And of course, the city is already under an obligation to do a shoreline adaptation plan in the future There's a new law that just passed a year ago that really pushes that initiative forward and gives local governments about 10 years to do the deeper planning on that. So that's not the focus of this effort, but of course, what we put in the element today might give that effort a little bit of guidance in terms of how those long-term sea level rise effects will impact the coastline and the beaches in particular. Of course, nature-based infrastructure is always welcome. There's a lot of different ways to do that in addition to what I mentioned tonight. Hardening infrastructure and making sure that what's out in those open spaces is protected and safe. There could be elevated fire risk and so forth in the future. Rewilding. Let's talk about rewilding. So in practice, like I mentioned earlier, it typically involves open space management, looking at overall ecological condition and health and thinking what's missing from a historical or ecological perspective. We think about the native plants and the species that used to be in the area. Are there ways that we can bring them back? And of course, the city has been on the path to bring back native plants for the native planting ordinances, mature tree ordinances. There's been already a lot of movement at maybe the ordinance and codes level to think about some of these issues, which is great. So when we think about how the open space element update can now reflect some of that, there's an opportunity to get some policy language tucked into certain parts of the element, which you'll see if you read the document. There are some ways that we're doing that. There is, of course, if you're already, many of you may be very well more aware of what they do than I am, but we're understanding there's a really robust habitat stewardship project here in Encinitas that does a lot of work along the creek corridors to do the restoration work. And that's just really exciting to see that. Not every community has that, and so you should be proud of that program is out there. Doing really important implementation work on the ground to bring back natural drainages, plantings, native plantings in those spaces. And of course, thinking about the long-term health of those spaces. Thinking about biodiversity and what it really looks like to restore native vegetation through those projects, both in the open spaces areas and as well as into the adjacent developed areas as well. There's a lot of opportunity there. So you'll see some of the language in the draft element if you read it on some of those specifics. So the last piece, again, is habitat connectivity. We think about it in terms, like I mentioned earlier, the ability of wildlife species to move between two different habitat zones in a broader area or region. And so there's a lot of ways that can be done. You're thinking about a system of corridors or linkages between corridors. We don't have a whole lot of maps in the presentation tonight, but if you look in that background report, we did a lot of work to look at kind of where these natural drainage courses are, the lagoons, and where some of the transverse corridors along the bluff lines in the community. There definitely has been a lot of protection already of some of those natural features, which is a lot to build on. But of course, there could be little gaps in the system where targeted interventions could still be happening through more implementation level projects or programs. So the resource management element, they have to really focus on what are those targeted updates to make sure that we're thinking about habitat connectivity holistically and not so much as an isolation as a single issue. The good news too is that the resource management element update did have a lot of good existing policy that did promote habitats and species conservation and connectivity already. So we really just kind of building on that a little bit in terms of this update, not really trying to reinvent the wheel too much because there's a lot there to work with already. But there's some new policies that do focus on interagency coordination. We didn't have a whole lot in the element update before, so we're recommending that need a little bit more to focus on that important role that the city has as a partner with the state or federal habitat agencies, as well as the regional conservation efforts that are happening as well. Thinking about offshore marine resources, promoting increased connectivity by prioritizing restoration, again, like I mentioned earlier. Really important tools in the toolbox, like managing invasive species. There's a lot of work that, of course, always needs to be done to manage those as they creep into natural areas, noxious weeds and other invasive pests. And then simple things that I think that are more community focused, like planting pollinator gardens, and again, that's a little bit connected to the native plant ordinance as well. But of course, there can always be community efforts to bring those pollinator-loving plant species back, which is really exciting to see some of that happening in the community. That really kind of concludes my overview. I think we do want to, I'll have Joan kind of talk about the review process, but thanks for listening, and we're definitely going to answer questions next, so thanks.
So the document is available for public review. It's draft, so typical of a process like this. the city will collect comments, and then the project team will review the comments and then do fine tuning of the document before it's finalized. The team is asking the comments be provided by February 27th, so there's still a couple of weeks. And you can send your comments via email to Evan, and his email address is here. And you can also use the QR code to provide comments on the document. And at any time, all of this information is always available on the website. The QR code is also on this piece here. So. With that, I'm going to turn this, I'm just going to come out of here. We want to turn to the Q&A portion of the meeting and see what kind of questions you have. This is interesting. We have one of these owls where it has the multiple cameras, and oh yeah, no, there's three of me. Jazz, can you help us out?
I honestly don't think there's anyone else online because our online person came in.
Oh, you're here. Okay,
Yeah.
I was wondering, where did our online person go? Okay,
I saw that
so
there were 3 comments or 5 comments in the chat.
okay, so I'm gonna unplug the owl.
Yeah.
Okay.
What did the chat say?
It
So
just
cute,
says thank you for joining the meeting.
It's so cute. Yeah, there's not 3 of you on the screen.
They were taking their.
It's a little distracting.
It is a little it's burrowing. Yeah, that's cute.
That's brilliant.
Okay, so
Oh, no, that's frozen.
now it's frozen. It'll go away soon.
It's just smiling on
There we go. Okay. Jazz, is it?
If someone joins, I'll let you know.
Okay. Claire, can you still hear? Yes? Okay, let's make sure that this number can hear.
And Joan, I did just want to mention that we are recording it. We recorded it a few minutes late, but just for in case anyone else in the community wants to listen to it, we like to provide all the resources online, so it is being recorded if anyone wants to listen to it afterwards. So.
Okay, great. So the way I like to do Q&A is take one question per person first, so everyone gets a chance to ask a question, and then we'll just kind of do laps around the room until everyone has their questions answered. So Sally, I saw that. Looks like you're ready to go.
Yeah, I have a lot of questions, but thank you, by the way, for doing this. There's a lot of work that went into the plan, obviously, and it was starting with a good plan, so that's good. Just going off of what you sort of ended the presentation with on issues of connectivity, I'm gonna cheat and I'm gonna combine a question. So, kind of the big thing that I see as someone who's really involved with environmental issues in North County in particular is that it's not clear who's in charge of implementation of this plan. I'm very familiar with our climate action plan. I'm very familiar with most of the ordinances. I'm involved in the native plant ordinance and on and on. But what we see throughout our city on pretty much everything is, I think, where we fall down is on implementation. And having clear people or divisions within the city that people know they can go to when they see, like, hey, this is an issue. I know this is part of the plan. Maybe you guys are missing this, like someone's dumping something into the lagoon, or kids are destroying our one remaining place of MHCP land by, riding e-bikes or motorcycles, we should say, through the canyon. So how is that addressed in all of this? And just to give you some idea, like a great example, for instance, in the Climate Action Plan, we say that we're reducing greenhouse gases by limiting landscaping equipment. People are supposed to have electric blowers and all of that. Well, newsflash, no, very few people have those. And the answer from the city is, oh, you're supposed to rat out your neighbor. So it's challenging at best.
Yeah, so let's hear about the implementation. Erica, do you want to?
Yeah.
Do you want to move over here? You can bring it
No,
up.
yeah, no, I'm typing up questions.
Yeah, and Jazz is
Yeah, everyone's taking
capturing
notes.
it.
We're all
Yeah.
note takers, data gatherers. Good question. I mean, the city's general plan, the policies are pretty broad, and there are implementation level programs in there, but the city's general plan isn't written to have, and Patty, you can step in and just say, no, you're wrong, Eric, but there's not a whole lot yet on the page in terms of implementation steps in the document, but I think the city implements the general plan in multiple ways, right? Code and ordinances, what gets put in city code, if there's an ordinance to change the code, that's when you start to see action. And so obviously the planning department manages all that, but it does come down to agencies and other departments as well that are partners in this. And so I might have Patty speak to kind of her vision for implementation.
That was the
as
other
well.
part of my question that
Yeah.
I was going to combine with this and kill two birds with one stone was what agencies do you work with and also neighboring cities to make all this stuff work?
Yeah.
Like connectivity and lagoon health and all of that.
Yeah, depending on what the resource is, right? So with our lagoons to the north, we work with Carlsbad, and then there's a lot of sand replenishment. There was a big permit that we coordinated with the Army Corps of Engineer and a lot of cities up and down the coast. So depending on what the resource is, we do inter-city coordination as well as Army Corps, Army Corps, depending if it's Coastal Commission, we work with quite a bit. I was just up in the Bay Area in a Coastal Commission hearing on short-term rentals, so it just depends on what the resource is, depending on what regulatory.
So like,
agency.
I'll give you a hard one, Escondido Creek, that ultimately ends up into the lagoon.
Yeah, and depending on what we're doing, right, does it require an army, are you impacting native habitat, impacting water resource, depending on what the project would determine what level of coordination for the resource, what resource agency, but anytime water, right, Army Corps is involved and U.S. Fish and Wildlife is, again, depending on what the project is and impacts and resources that are present, right? So, and then and to your comment about the leaf blowers, yeah, we don't know, I don't know of any city that has code enforcement that is out on Saturday mornings, checking whether or not you're using gas or electric, right? We do our best to write ordinances that are really implementable and defensible, and that so code enforcement can go out and enforce, but we can't, I wish I had a magic stick to, require people to adhere to the rules and regulations, but I don't know any agency that can, mandate or legislate human behavior, right? We do our best, but.
Well, I think also part of it comes down to a lot of people just don't even know what those, I mean, I'm someone who pays attention to all of that and fights for all that stuff to get into a plan, but, most of my neighbors who are great people and all environmentally conscientious, they have no idea.
And that's a great point too, education, and so that's why even like in our native plant ordinance, there's a big education component and an incentive program, right? Just to get the word out there, and part of it is, one of the programs is to, if the council approves, is to do like educational workshops to help people learn and know, become familiar about it, because you're absolutely right. It's people are busy, lives are busy, right? And not everyone, we do our best to try to get the word out, use social media, project forums, we have constant contact lists, so we do our best, but not everyone is checking or doesn't use each mode of communication, right? So it's hard. We're open to feedback if there's any too, like with your social or professional networks, if you have any great input or strategy that you'd like to share to help us get the word out, because we do a lot of work on these projects and they're very, it's a lot of work and we put our heart and soul into it. So anything that you could suggest to help us disseminate the information would be great.
Well, one way,
I'm
the
gonna
HOAs,
Yeah.
I want to keep the questions going around.
I'll just pause, or I can donate a question, but I don't have one right now. Just listen up.
Okay.
Yeah, actually, the habitat connectivity plan, I was reading, and there's something where it's supposed to be all of our surrounding cities are joined together to provide access, habitat access. And I read where the city developed a plan, but it hasn't been approved. I don't know who it's supposed to be approved by, and that it is not become part of all of the other multi-city,
The MHCP.
yes, that's what it is.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, why aren't we? Who do we have to see to get it done? Permitted, whatever,
It's
and,
kind of critical too,
Huh?
because it's adjacent, it's.
well,
it's-
yeah,
yeah,
you're not
so
gonna
let's-
have some
yeah, so let's-
activity.
Let's get an update on the MHCP.
The MHCP there was a draft done about a decade ago. It may have been more. I'd have to check the exact date. But what came of it was that it was found at the time that it wasn't financially feasible for the city to become a full sign-on to that. However, what came of that, one of the things that came of it was the Habitat Stewardship Program that we touched on earlier. That was a more fiscally responsible way that we could still get into open spaces. We identified 10 open spaces as part of that program, and that's administered by the Parks and Rec Department. And so they identified 10 that have been, overgrown with invasives and whatnot. And, each year funding is allocated. From what I understand, I think they've got through 5 of them. Cottonwood Creek Park is one. So they just kind of go down that list. Parks and Rec works with Sandag, for example, to kind of touch on the first question. I was on a call with Parks and Rec and Sandag staff. Sandag staff was very interested to hear about the Habitat Stewardship Program and kind of thinking about ways that they could help us with, grants to make, the rest of those sites, come to fruition, to remove natives.
All the other
Or, sorry,
surrounding North
install.
County cities did finalize their MHCP where the loan,
Oh, really?
yeah,
Interesting.
yeah.
All right, I think we'll come up here. Camille.
Well, I have a very involved question because it's all related because it's the same topic. So I guess my understanding is the rewilding is involving native plants, I guess. So I want to get, the devil's in the details, right? And it's really getting specific. So that's right, so if somebody's rewilding, they're using natives, right? Is that correct?
Not necessarily, it's not like required to use just natives to check the box, but
Because I'm trying to unpack basically RM 14.4 to understand exactly which projects that this would capture. This says revegetation and appropriate landscaping of all areas graded and scraped of vegetative cover shall be required with land use and development, and they're adding the words to promote rewilding. And I want to understand exactly what that means and what's captured. Because there's a lot of grading plans. I'm in Liebenheim. There's a lot of grading plans out there. Everybody's doing things every so often. And will that apply to what's happening in my neck of the woods?
It could, I think we wrote it to try to be broad enough to kind of give some direction, but I think where it comes down in implementation is the codes and the standards and the more procedural aspects of permitting.
Well,
But those activities would have to be consistent with this policy.
well, okay, so then it would encompass, so like somebody's not just even developing their lot, like say they're re-landscaping it, then that would still trigger this. Is that what I'm understanding?
no, not for private homes, just like private homes are exempt from the native plant ordinance. And I think.
But where does it, because, no, can I clarify that for a minute?
sure.
Because every time that I see my neighbors do something, right, I understand that they've got to go back and revegetate and do all that stuff. And so that's where I'm seeing this language getting tacked on and going, wait, are you now saying that this is triggering anything? Because I read that and I read it as applying very, very broadly.
Yeah, and that's great input, because maybe we can clarify the text. So how I read it is, landscaping of all areas graded and scraped of vegetation cover shall be required with land use and development. So in my planning brain, I'm thinking it's an entitlement project, not like a private homeowner going out and having to comply with fire department clearance requirements.
Because that's an interesting one, because when I see land use and development, I go, oh, that's who you have to submit a grading plan to. So any kind of, and I'm seeing the words grading and scraping, and that's really common, because my concern on this, and I really, really, really want to underscore this, is that we've got, we're zoned 1 house per 2 acres out there. I am extremely concerned about the native plant policy. I think that there needs to be an exception for the large lots, because I'm really concerned that you're going to basically reintroduce or expand the wildlife-urban interface and increase the fire risks, and we all know like how much we're at risk out there. So I do think that there does need to be clarifications here, because that very high fire severity hazard zone is something else, and the larger lots add a lot of complexity to it.
The next.
And, sorry.
No, that's a great
And I want
point. That's a great
Yeah,
point.
so I want to keep this going because I know you have a question and I see you.
And we need to go in a minute.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I have a Zoom thing at 7 at house.
Okay,
So
do you want to
that's
ask it
fine.
really fast?
I can go really fast. So, one thing, I'm an environmental commissioner, and so I'm going to hear this on Thursday. And so I encourage you to use a map of the city and show where it is. Like when you said that you didn't have a map, please use a map.
So I have a comment then, not a question, and that is on the maps that are in the report, they're impossible to read, and so I sort of read it as there is a map, not here's a map to look at. So I don't know if there's a way to make those more legible or such that they can be blown up.
Yeah, they
Put it
don't
on the
blow
screen.
up on
'Cause-
your computer, so that
You're talking about the black and white maps and
the maps that are in
Well,
the
so
element.
the one that Eric
From
showed,
the 80,
and there, I
9.
think there were two. The one Eric showed on connectivity, and then there's another in there. But yeah, they they were unintelligible.
Yeah.
Okay, that's really good feedback. I know you have to go, so thank you.
And then the other thing is, my husband has actually been doing a lot of the work with San Diego Botanic Garden for rewilding for the Cottonwood Creek Park, the Ocean Knoll Park, the
Saxony.
Saxony,
Indian Head.
and also Oak Crest Park. And that actually might be a good thing to highlight. If you guys know about that.
Yeah, we're taking notes of that. Thanks for staying.
Okay, yeah.
Okay,
Thank you.
and I also want to encourage everyone, we're going to keep staying and answer questions first of all, but I want to encourage everyone to submit your comments in writing so that we get the details. It's really important. So we are taking notes, but we always know that getting your written comments is still like a more complete way to communicate. All right, so Tony, I want to go to you. If you have a question.
At this point, I'm an observer and listener.
Okay, so we're going to do another lap. Sally, I
Yeah.
think you might have
Well-
another one.
I'll jump off of something Camille was saying, which is I actually have I live in Lehmanheim. I'm the very back, so I'm top of Fortuna Ranch Road. My concern is knowing what I know about fire ecology, wildlife habitat, native plants, etc., and all the research that's been done on it, and frankly, a lot of research related to the most recent fires in Los Angeles, and then how fires move through like Paradise and that, and there's some really interesting studies on that would say that we're better protected with native plants than most of the non-natives. And in fact, in Lehmanheim, like I'll see someone like, oh, a eucalyptus, like our Fortuna Ranch Road all the way up is lined with mostly eucalyptus trees. And then if it's not a eucalyptus tree, it's a pepper tree, which is like a complete fire hazard. And when people have said, because it's it's like along the street, so it's like you own the property, but you're required by the city to, there's some like loose guideline or whatever. One of my neighbors, their tree came down and they were looking for a safer option, and they were told by the city they had to put a pepper tree back up. And so it was like, okay, great, I can see it now as we're racing down Fortuna Ranch Road through the circle of fire that'll be around us. I mean, that's the biggest concern. And then also as you go, like too bad we didn't have the native plant ordinance in place when the One Oaks up the hill back there was put in place, because, there's feathergrass, there's all sorts of invasive species even bamboo and everything that's right up against conservation land that the Escondido Creek Conservancy purchased. And you're just like, okay, it's just a matter of time before this is all destroyed.
So I actually want to respond to you because I have a very different experience. So Bridges Golf Course came in, so fully mitigated project. They installed their landscaping plan, which turned out to be mostly habitat. What was there originally didn't pose much of a fire risk. We know what was there before because we were long timers there. Bridges came in, and I have photos of what that landscaping looks like, and it's mostly native, and it's a terrible fire risk. The problem is because it's more than 100 feet from the house, nobody can touch it because it's native. If it weren't native, it wouldn't be subject to those restrictions. And so this stuff is 8 feet tall, it's hanging over the house. Like, it is a terrible situation, and I don't want this to happen because people have one chance to get a native planting right, and it has to be perfect for perpetuity. Otherwise, you adversely affect every other landowner around for half a mile, increasing fire risk, making insurance untenable. I do not want this to happen to anybody else because it's been devastating for my family. And so we have to be really careful about how we do stuff so we don't screw things up moving permanently, like it happened next to us.
No, I understand that. I think that has more to do with how that policy was implemented through there and the proximity to houses and having enough open space and everything. But I mean, if you say like, you know, people can plant other things, the plants that people go to are generally really high fire plants.
But you can change them.
I just want to
as people
see,
realize.
Eric, listening to this comments, this conversation, is like, what is the tie-in to the update?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good discussion because there's a fine balance between native plantings, but to your point, the maintenance and making sure that they're maintained.
But you can't.
Yeah.
You absolutely cannot do it once it's in if it's more than 100 feet from your house or 20 feet. And that's clear from the native plants ordinance too, because the language in there says you're not probably going to do anything about that unless you go get a permit. And people aren't going to go back and go get the permits and do this stuff. So it becomes a permanent nuisance that nobody can deal with. And so everyone looks there. The insurance companies look at it, and we look at it, and the fire department. Everybody looks at this and they go, yeah, that's a problem. And it's outside of our jurisdiction. We can't do anything about it because it's habitat. And that's a pretty awful place to be in.
So
I just want to give Eric a chance to.
No, I hear you. I mean,
Yeah.
We have regulations like defensible space, which you're referring to, and then the city can have an ordinance. State law really doesn't grab a whole lot in certain fire zones, and not every part of the city is mapped in that zone. So, you know, the nuance of which policy takes precedence is complicated.
The new fire
it
chief,
almost becomes site specific.
the new fire chief has begun to address the issue that you're worried about in terms of people letting that not being able to touch that habitat, and they are sending crews where they haven't done that in the past.
That's true, but again, the jurisdiction's
not
only
bridges,
it's only 100 feet. And I mean, we work with Rancho Santa Fe Fire, so like it truly is. And if you read through the native plants ordinance, it does say that it shall be minimal. Pruning, trimming, anything shall be minimal. Like the native plants, like policy makes this all very, very, very clear, and it's irrevocable once you go down that path.
I want to just give the other people a chance to ask more questions too.
Well, I was surprised to read that agricultural land is included in this. So I'm not sure why that is. How do we do rewilding and habitat navigation and whatever that, if we are trying to save or encourage agricultural land? I mean, I love that we have it, it's part of our history, whatever, but I just didn't understand why that was considered a resource in this entity, whatever.
Let's, Eric, can you give us some clarification?
Yeah, I mean, ag land staff can help me out too if I
Yeah.
get this wrong, but ag land wasn't really within the scope of this update. There were existing policies from 1980 something, from when the element was first drafted. The city's never really touched. So a lot of that ag land is gone. I mean, there's little pockets here and there that still exist, but it is for the most part gone. And the little pockets maybe you want to keep. And so I think some of the, I see Patty wanting to speak, but I think we didn't do a whole lot of work.
Well,
on
Fox
that.
Point wouldn't exist if we
Right,
weren't
right.
trying
But go
to
ahead,
still
Patty.
do that,
So
so.
this is not something we did a lot of.
And this is,
work
like,
on.
your questions are helpful
I mean, if
too,
something's
because-
wrong, we should
Yeah.
fix it now.
Sure.
Because it's gonna be
Yeah.
another 10 years before this happens
Yeah,
again.
and these are the types of comments too, where the team can go back and like look at the language and the update and like see if a clarification's needed. So, but Patty.
Yeah, so I think this was something that we left in because the title in section K on page 28 is preservation of ag land. So we don't want to ruin that opportunity to maintain those historic uses, which, as you pointed out, is such a good part of our history. So we're not touching those because we're not expecting those areas to contribute to, rewilding, right? And I think it's important. I wanted to share also, as Eric mentioned, that the definition of rewilding is so incredibly broad, and we've attended state panels. Eric has spoken at a professional planning association because those planners are all trying to, how do you interpret it? So I think it's really important, I think Camilla, kind of to your point, is that we have to interpret it in the context of Encinitas, right? What we're going to do is going to be different than what San Joaquin Valley is going to do, what, I don't know, Chula Vista is going to do, right? Very, very different. So, right? And so a lot of our opportunities, we want to preserve our agricultural history, right? But a lot of our opportunities we're taking credit for the good work that the city's already done with all this, the beach replenishment areas. We have these, the marine conservation areas, we have 4 of those, really trying to enhance what we have because we're a primarily built out city, right? We don't have thousands of acres of, pristine, undeveloped habitat with, connectivity galore, right? We are predominantly built out. We will add a map next time, but like there are areas we have some key areas that we are, preserved, and we're fortunate that they've got open space easements, they've got dedications, they've got more areas. So we want to comply with the law in the context of our existing framework, and then also look for opportunities where we can, whether it's through the park work, with the Cottonwood Creek, the Habitat Steward program. So we have to be realistic, and the bill does give us that flexibility, right? We will implement the bill in the context of our city and per council's direction and what fits for our city, right? And the good work that our volunteers are doing, right? So we're not going to decimate our agricultural history by any means.
On the issue of fire and all of that, I mean, one thing that's a great example that would make us all safer back where we live is the, I don't know who's in charge of the space. Every time we ask someone about it, it's all along Escondido Creek. If you start from Elfin Forest and come all through Aleavine into where it, eventually goes into the lagoon, it is a death trap of dead trees, dead brush, overgrown, to your point, Camille, overgrown, and we've offered to go out and can we just clear some of this, because we want to be able to drive out of here. And we're always told no, and then it's it's Fish and Wildlife. No, it's Army Corps of Engineers.
It's county. This is where the new fire department, the new fire station is going to go by Little Oaks Park.
Yeah.
So Escondido Creek comes down through there and then eventually floods people that are back there, and then eventually goes down behind Coal Ranch Road and out to the lagoon. So
That's county land. And
county is some of it.
The county, that
yes,
part.
a lot of that is county land. Some of that, but the county then defers to Army Corps of Engineers because it's riparian.
And for a
And so
while,
you get
the
a lot of
Nature
this.
Collective had a grant,
They're
and they
still
were
doing it.
clearing some of it. Well, they told me recently that they had to stop because they ran out of money.
Right.
So that was up behind that neighborhood,
Val
Serrano,
Yes.
where they had cleared a bunch of stuff out of there, but they then didn't finish. And I'll tell you, That's the thing that's gonna prevent people from getting out of Alevinheim alive.
So I'm wondering, because I think this is such an important discussion, and I'm a little. So Jazz and I were actually this morning up in the Pacific Palisades. So like, it's all very real to us. What you're, yeah, because we're doing some work up there, and but this might be like a topic that's not like this part of the Army, the resource management element and policy structure. But I'm wondering, like, is there another like program that this type of this
Well, if it's county
issues can be
land,
raised in?
if it's county land, right, we don't have control over it, right? But, you know,
But it comes through the middle of Alevinheim, right along the road. So it's
we
like,
don't own it.
you can't drive, like if you're coming down, you know, through Lone Jack, you're up against that creek the whole time. And it creates like this incredible fire problem.
And the fire departments have mapped it, all of the corridors, and I did want to put, because this does tie into the resource management, because we are talking about rewilding all these corridors and things, because that's where the fires are going to be traveling. They're going to be going up Escondido Creek, they're going to be going up Copper Creek, they were, you know, we were lucky that Witch Creek didn't hit the ocean, because had it gotten into Escondido Creek, it would have.
Correct.
And so we have to kind of think about how we're handling these things, not necessarily to increase those risks to existing residents, is a concern of mine.
Well, I think to clarify something, and you can tell me if I've got this wrong, but I know from all the conversations in the native plant ordinance, the issue about you know, how native plants are trimmed and all of that was not thinking about us in Alevinheim. It was thinking about Cottonwood Creek when Parks, or whoever the guys are that do the maintenance, you know, they weren't trained properly, and they, at a critical time, it was like nesting season, when everything was like supposed to be left overgrown, they went in and clear cut, and then a lot of the stuff died. And so that was like a huge like bummer for a lot of people who worked so hard on that for so many years. And so it was that, in thinking of like, so really what we're seeing here is that I think this element should maybe do a little more work on separating out certain, like what works for Cardiff does not work for Alevinheim, and what, you know, what's good at the beach is not good. I mean, it's sometimes a 20-degree difference in weather from, you know, the beach to where we are, depending on which, if you're, you know, down in a little gully. So we can be having frost in the winter, and everybody else is like out here in shorts on the other side of town, just a few miles away. So, I mean, it is hard to take a city like Encinitas with such diverse habitat and ecology and try and generalize it all.
Yeah. I'm hearing your point that a more nuanced approach to some of these things might be more appropriate. So we're taking that in the notes. Yes.
This is a fascinating discussion, and I come more from a climate action planning background, less resource management, so I don't know if these suggestions are appropriate for here. But I feel like the definition of rewilding, it would be important for it to be specific. I was surprised when I heard that it's not necessarily natives. I would love it, just for my common input, to be natives, but then I heard your concern, that's horrible. And back in indigenous times, when the native plants were here and the Kumeyaay were here, it was very much people involved with the plants and taking care of it. They did prescribed burns. It was a real mistake when we set aside areas in national parks and just let them overgrow. So maybe there's a place in this element, or with comments, to reconsider that part of the native plant ordinance, that active management of native plants, and even include training of staff. And two other things is considering tribal stewardship of lands. There's a lot of programs in different parts of the country where they have relationships with indigenous tribes that come and manage in the ways they always have, the native plants, and those have been really successful in a lot of places. They kind of need the infrastructure for that to happen. And finally, maybe allowing, you hear this all the time when volunteers want to do something and they're left out. I know the city of San Diego and other places are trying to think of policies that allow more volunteers, facilitate volunteer help, because there's so many people that could just go pick weeds and plant some things. I do the Oceanal Canyon work they left, I guess, but it's amazing. So I think if there's room in the programming to encourage volunteer management of the open space, tribal stewardship of the open space, defining, like I wouldn't want to define rewilding if your concern wasn't addressed, right? And so those are my comments based on what I've heard.
Well, thank you for those. Do you have another question?
Oh, do you really want to go there?
Yes, that's why we're here.
No, I think I'm going to stop where I am.
Okay. But yeah, I just want to reiterate too, please submit comments in writing.
Okay. I wanted to unpack actually the public safety element, because when I went to the website today, because, I'm reading the code, I'm finding the one from 1995 on our city's website, and I'm finding the updated versions of the other stuff. It sounds like there's a more recent public safety element than 1995, but I couldn't find it.
So the safety element got approved a couple of years ago by council, and we have to submit it to Coastal Commission.
Oh, that's why it's on that.
LCP. So there we sit, and we are in active negotiations with Coastal Commission, addressing some of their concerns.
Okay, because again, it's as far, like, if we can think of a way, and my understanding is that if it's really native habitat, there is no exception to the 100-foot rule because it's coming from the feds and the state. It's not coming from us, is how I've been explained to it. So that's where, locking yourself in permanently, and again, things are thicker out there than they've ever been in, 150 years.
I think Patty wants to jump in on that.
Well, I appreciate your comments, and we will circle back, because we've spent a lot of time with our Jordan, our fire marshal, and we're about the language in the safety element, and I just want to clarify what the current state of interpretation is in terms of like 100 feet of clearance, because, and again, I'm not a biologist, but the team that's working on the native plant ordinance, they are restoration ecologists, biologists,
Sure.
But, so I just want to share that. So the native plant, I want to clarify a couple things. You only have to do 50% native, okay? And single-family homes are exempt, so any single-family home would be exempt from that.
That's including the 2-acre size lot.
It's not based on lot size whatsoever, it's based on land use. So if you are a single-family home, you're exempt from the native plant. There is an incentive program that we would like to encourage non-natives landscapes to go to native landscaping. But only is it 100% requirement when you are within, I think it's 100 feet of an environmentally sensitive area. And that is the only projects that are subject to the native plant, just to be really clear on this. It's only if you have a project that requires I think it's a design review that requires a landscape plan. So if your discretionary project doesn't require a landscape plan, you're not subject to the native plant ordinance. And then if you're doing a major use permit in the open space ecological reserve, then you would have to be subject to the native plant ordinance. But it's not a one size fits all.
No, I hear that, but I also think of One Oak, right? They had to give 70% of their property already for habitat, pretty close to there, plus a permanent endowment of probably, I don't know, hundreds of thousands or millions.
Yep.
And my sense is that it's fully mitigated, and that's a lot. That's not, it's not the use of 30% or whatever it is, which is pretty close to there. That's not a huge use for development. And I just feel like that at that point, that whatever was built there needs to be an ability to adapt to an ongoing changing climate, because we're seeing it and it's happening fast. And my concern is that if you're putting native plants up there, you're not going to be able to, and those houses and those people are going to be at risk. And a lot was given to the environment. as a result of that development and permanently set aside, and there's just a lot of good, you know, there's a lot of preservation.
I'm not familiar with
But
that
those
development.
are, those
1
houses, one
Where
of
the water
our,
tower is.
yeah,
on
that,
the back
they
there,
don't,
past east of
they're
Levi.
individual homeowners, so.
Shade.
No, but the
Shaded.
development had to do all that.
Yeah.
The development, the developer
Off of,
did.
Right.
And so
Ranch
that's
Road.
it, but, so I just feel like those homes that were created by, you know, basically the developer did all that stuff, I feel like whatever is needed to keep them safe needs, like, you know, and I'm just worried
Yeah.
about tying our hands permanently
Yeah.
for them in the
That's
future.
county land on
Does
the
that-
other side, so that wouldn't, everything east of Del Oro or
I understand.
is
No, I
county.
understand.
One thing that might help you feel better, there's language, because we coordinated extensively with the fire department on the native plants, and it says that fire department codes supersede the native plant ordinance.
That's true, but the only reason, they only have 100 feet of authorization anyway, and I put that in my comment letter responding. They don't have jurisdiction beyond that, and like you can ask them, and so they have no jurisdiction. And it's that jurisdiction, the city jurisdiction, is basically permanently surrendered if native plants go in there. And that's a really important, because you have to go through mitigation, and that is made clear in that native plants policy.
But you don't
And-
require mitigation.
No, if you want to change it. If somebody realizes, oh wait, this thing that we built is a hazard or doesn't work, then you would have to go and mitigate it. Otherwise, it's going to be maintained as this nuisance thing. And that's exactly what happened again with the Bridges landscaping plan. And my concern is not to have other people get locked into these permanent bad plans where nobody has jurisdiction anymore except the agencies.
Yeah, I was gonna say, so when it comes to mitigation, that is the regulatory agent, right? The resource agencies that have required them to do all that and do a.
But that wasn't,
management plan.
that particular part, like I could show you the landscaping plan. It was not originally supposed to be this stuff. It was mitigated. They ended up planting natives instead of what their design actually was. So it was not a mitigation. This is literally, like, we are the perfect test case. They literally took a landscaping plan, and this is what they planted, and it ended up being basically brush. It got thick, and it got heavy, and it's huge, and it was not like that when it was native before any of the grading happened.
What I can do though is I can check with our biologists, restoration ecologists, because I'm not familiar with the requirement that just because it's native, you can't touch it. If it's occupied habitat, that's a whole different ballgame, but again, I'm just.
I'll tell you something after.
Yeah, we can chat about that.
I think there's a
but-
document.
And that's the native plant ordinance, which is going to planning commission.
Exactly.
Shameless plug.
Next week.
Yeah,
So-
Commissioner.
So,
I would just want to-
Camille's gonna be there.
I'll be there.
Does
I
anyone
better
have
start reading.
Yeah, you better get on it.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go
I have
read
some-
mine.
another topic?
Yes,
Another
yes,
type of
yes.
question?
Yes, so in circling back where I started with the MHCP, so along Manchester, there's a development that's currently, there's a draft EIR. We haven't seen the preserve. Brian Grover's project. So this is a great example. So so that property where all those trails are and everything, that was the part of the MHCP that was supposed to be finalized. It is, according to, I mentioned to, I think, someone here when I first got here, I'm very involved with the Sierra Club locally. And one of our biologist who gets really involved in a lot of issues, and usually much bigger pieces of property, who doesn't even live anywhere near here, he's like, are you paying attention to this project? Do you know that there are some of the most, it's the last remaining habitat for some critical small species. I'll get the list, but, and the point about all of this is that now we've got a development that's going in next to it, and we don't have a clear way to protect that land, really. I mean, Brian moved the line of the fencing a little bit so that it wouldn't be all the way into the preserve, but basically his attitude was, it was never finalized, so it's fair game. I can push that in as far as I want to go. And so I'm like, but it should be city property, City of Encinitas opens designated for open space because, you know, there's a trailhead there, there's trails, like all sorts of people hike through there. So it's a significant piece of property. Apparently, it's the only remaining area that has that certain coastal native habitat. And when that's gone, it's gone. And what, just by way of being obnoxious, because I have a forum here, but the people need to understand that San Diego County is the only biodiverse hotspot in the entire North America. So, and one of a handful in the globe, around the globe. We have more plant and animal species than anywhere. And, you know, it's like, oh, well, who cares about that little butterfly or this little thing there? And it's like, and little by little will just be a bunch of, you know, palm trees and, I don't know, feather grass, you know, waving around, and ice plant, and everything will be gone. The birds that we love when you walk outside and Alevenheim, and you just can't even believe the wildlife that's there. You know, we have bobcats, an occasional mountain lion, we have a wide assortment of coyotes, you know, all sorts of small little creatures. Some I couldn't even tell you what they are. We have roadrunners, you name it. And so this issue is important to make sure that we have a mechanism within our city to say, okay, all of San Diego decided this was an important area, and there were tons of wildlife specialists, scientists, politicians, all sorts of people involved in that, and we're not upholding our little bargain there.
Carlsbad's done it. It came up on La Costa 48 when the gentleman came back of the lagoon, and the issue with doing the houses on La Costa 48, and it infringed upon on the setback for the lagoon.
So it's ESHA. So I don't know the particulars of this project, but I do know that that applicant is quite, let's say, experienced.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, he usually is,
Well, he's
you know,
had some
responsible.
CPD, so it's not it's a known. Brian showed up and made the presentations.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
So I don't know the biological, you know, landscape of it, but, you know, there are requirements, like for wetland setbacks, right? The Coastal Commission requires a 100-foot setback if there's a wetland, if it's an ESHA.
What
you
do
know,
you define ESHA? Just so everyone
environmentally
knows.
sensitive habitat area. You're right, right. So I don't know about him saying that he can go wherever he wants. If it's occupied habitat, that doesn't make any biological sense. But again, I don't know the particulars. But that's where we trust. So we're in advanced planning, but you know, and obviously we write the policy documents, and we too care about the open space. And I do want to say that the council cares about the open space. It is one of their last year's strategic working plan goal was to find a way to obtain more open space through developers. So that could be, you know, an opportunity. So I do want to throw that out there because again, not everyone's aware of that or reads that document, but there's goals and then there's implementing objectives. And that's one of the objectives that we were, you know, happy to hear about. I think we've talked to even the team about that. This is, you know, on the council's work plan. So it is important to the leadership of the city. But
Is it in environmental review, that project?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's
there's
under
a draft EIR.
Okay,
it's
so
under
that's
current planning.
like a good, so for people who have concerns about that,
Yes.
that's
Yeah,
the process right
Manchester,
now
You get to the end of the house.
to make sure to.
Don't worry,
It
we're
opens up on the
Okay.
right side.
implementing.
This is
Let's make sure the connections are made,
This
and also for everyone else to hear
The
too.
trailhead
And
there.
Mr. Prendergast is a planning commissioner, so he'll be able to vote on it. So,
We're like the nightmare couple.
no, I appreciate your.
We're so glad you're here.
Yeah.
So when Bob's coming at planning commission with all of his environmental stuff, you can blame it on me.
Oh, I already figured that out.
So I will throw out an easy one. Okay, this should be a no-brainer, especially where we are with mobility issues and everything. We need bike racks, so when people want to go to the San Alejo Lagoon and or the preserve off of Manchester or the many areas where they can go, and they want to ride their bike and then go hiking, they should be able to park their bikes safely.
I know we heard
We
various
do have
comments
bike racks.
about amenities
Some,
or
but not at trail.
trails and open
Not
space.
salad.
Is that part of the update?
I mean, it can be, I might defer to staff because I know that we had some discussions about
About what?
how some of
There
the
are some
access
in the lagoon,
issues
but not
dovetail with the
many.
multimodal work and the circulation element and other transportation plans that the city has, so I know that there's been some commitments made to look at that.
And, yeah, we have our Trails Master Plan, and then Evan just shared that our sustainability team is,
They're working on a plan for prioritizing bike racks throughout the city.
Oh,
So
that's great.
There's been some funding that came up, and so, yeah, that's something they're looking at.
and we can take your comment from this meeting to say, please prioritize bike racks to help make it accessible and.
At Trailheads, was that the
Yeah,
general?
trailheads, and
Mhm.
there's some at the San Alejo Preserve, but certainly not in a place that's easy to find, and so like, I'm down there all the time, and it's hard to park frequently down there.
There should be some over at the water treatment facility.
There
Yeah.
are,
There are. Oh,
or there used to be.
yeah, there are towards the building at the end.
Well, safety.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I get it.
Okay, we only have a couple minutes and
Well,
we're
wait,
wrapping up.
on the bike thing, it was,
Yes.
excuse me, I'm sorry.
No.
No, the
Oh,
bike.
let's
Tony.
finish the
the-
bike.
No, 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 that was
Oh,
just
okay.
scratching my head.
I was like, it hasn't gone yet.
It comes up all the time when the larger apartment complexes under the density bonus laws that have been approved, there's a significant dearth of bike stalls. And there's not because the code doesn't require it. So I think that
Right.
code updates, I guess, might be on someone's work plan. There's not a lot of requirements for it. There's requirements for car chargers, there's requirements for like a few stalls of bike storage, but I don't know if the code keeps up with the fact that there's gonna be 550 people living in the complex, and I think might be like 20 bike stalls.
There are green building codes that could address.
Okay, Camille,
There
you've
are,
been
but-
patient. I
Okay.
need something else.
I'm going to change the
Yeah.
subject.
Okay.
RM 16.2, this is the pursuing acquisition of additional publicly accessible conserved land, balancing resource conservation and habitat significance, particularly in areas outside of current walkable access to open space, such as eastern Alevenheim neighborhood and along the I-5 corridor. I want to talk about eastern Alevenheim. I think it should be removed from here. For a variety of reasons. One of which is there are, I think it's something at 7, I'll have to look up how many miles of trails, I'll put it in my comment letter, just immediately north of Liebenhain in the county lands. These were never permitted, they were illegally blazed. There is very good road access to each of them. I think that for the most part, if there are areas in Liebenhain, those need to be preserved for habitat purposes because of the degradation that we've seen up on those mountains. And they have access and driveway access. The problem with eastern Liebenhain is there are no roads up there for people to park. So you'd be opening trails and there cannot be any access up there because they're all private roads. So Rancho Summit, private road, Lone Jack, at the end of Lone Jack, there's private roads, again, no parking anywhere. So when you're talking about that, where are you going to put your people
But if you acquire the
beyond?
land, you can park it.
Well,
You would put a trailhead, you would actually
you
put
should
stalls.
probably talk to the landowners then, because
No,
I
but-
think
but-
that, no, because I think.
Perkins can sell, she can sell the property to the
That's
city.
me.
She's
I
pretty good.
could.
You could.
And
I knew that was coming. I should've told her to be quiet.
But I've already talked to the agencies about deed restricting
Right, well,
for
then
that.
that's up to
So exactly. And so why put stuff in there if the rest of my family's property was degraded? Like, it was, like, my family set aside stuff that was supposed to be preserved in perpetuity. It was not. So I've gone to the agencies and they've told me, you go and you get deed restrictions on that property.
Right.
And so I don't know that it makes sense to put that stuff in, given, like, there's a lot of history there and there's
You're
a lot of
saying like there's
sensitivities.
feasibility issues.
There's
Well,
major feasibility
And
issues.
to Camille's point about the degradation from the bikes, and now,
Because
like,
once
people
you
aren't
do
even
it-
using mountain bikes anymore, they're full on
devastating.
e-bikes, like motorcycles, setting up jumps and blazing trails.
It's devastating.
It's
Yeah, you just watch it at
destroyed.
night as they chicane with their headlamps
Exactly.
coming down
Yeah,
the
they do
mountain
night
between us and San
rides.
Diego.
Oh, we
It's
can see 'em
24,
from our-
it's 24 hour
Yeah.
out there. And by the way, those 24-hour, our trail hours are dusk to dawn, but because Carlsbad has 24-hour trails, everything then floods across the county lands, then floods across the Liebenheim lands, and there's no oversight, and people are just
And,
dealing
and
with
there's
it.
also
Or paving-
kids that go
or
out
paving
there.
of Del Oro.
There's
Oh my-
kids that go out there.
That's a
and-
problem.
And like, you know, doing whatever they're doing, but like, there's a fire hazard from
Well, that's,
unsupervised activity, which is off the trails and all of that. And wait, wasn't that fire
that
last
was
spring?
an arson in June, right on
Oh,
one
yeah.
of those trails that, again, no permits, and the reason they blazed that is because my family said, please don't come through here. So
Right.
they blazed that whole thing out. Again, no permits, no biological, no nothing on those 7 miles of trails or something. I measured it at one point. And I mean, and it's only like 400 acres. Like, that's a huge impact. And so, you know, I'm talking about habitats. The habitat's either significant or it's not, but there's already been so much up there that I think that the Liebenheim part needs to be out, because also there's feasibility of getting
Yeah,
people up there.
So we've got that
Something.
note, and I think you're
Yeah.
going to submit that in writing too.
I will submit that in
Okay.
writing.
Thank you. And there's other comments too. I imagine. And there's great
Okay.
trails. You could go through Wildflower and all through
There's
there.
so many
Just
trails.
fine. You can get down to the creek.
Well,
So
does
many trails.
anyone have another topic that hasn't been raised yet?
I think.
My biggest issue was really, you know, trying to figure out management of all of this.
No.
A plan is only what it is on paper, you know, if there's no one to like actually make it happen. So,
Regulation is only good as it
Yeah.
can be enforced, so.
Okay. All right.
We need like environmental police.
Oh, I know. I did have a question with the sand nourishment. Do they do all sorts, I mean, I just take it for granted that this is happening, but maybe not. Before that sand is deposited, I know they
It's
check for
tested.
like consistency and everything. What about chemicals, PFAS,
There's
all of
there's a
that?
health standard that requires, there's public health levels of sand being tested. I know that because of the lagoon in Encino.
Right,
You test the sand before it has to reach a certain public health standard before it can go on the beach.
right.
And it's with the regulatory agencies, so
Yes.
I think it took us like, I don't know, 50 years or some crazy number of decades to get that permit approved.
Right.
So I have the utmost confidence that every regulation was analyzed and that it's, you know, it's meeting the regulatory agency's
I think the
requirements.
State Lands Agency oversees the lagoon, so Oceanside's about to dredge, and I think that has to be tested.
I think, did we
We have one more
finish our-
comment question.
I have one more
It's
question.
ongoing.
In
It's
the
ongoing.
discussions up till now
Yeah.
for coastal erosion, has managed retreat been mentioned, or is that like a word like Voldemort?
It was talked about, but we used different.
We use different language. Just because I thought that's a good consideration sometimes for coastal things. Okay.
What's the wording?
Well, people don't like that comment because it's like, it's triggering because you
It
think
is.
of entire neighborhoods being bulldozed and everything. But like Natural Solutions, like what happened in Cardiff is actually an award-winning project and the first one of its kind that was done in the state, and the rest of the environmental community up and down the entire coast of California is looking to that project now and going, hey, that's an inexpensive way to solve like a huge issue. And so, you know,
It doesn't work with the cliff areas.
Yeah.
no, the cliffs
Yeah.
are a different
Different
thing,
animal.
but I mean, it's pretty
Oceanside
well.
just put a test case in, I think, with the fencing, like the snow fence type of thing.
And they're also
Put that
doing,
in.
I don't know where they are in their phase right now, but they've had proposals for building out like artificial reefs in different formats to try, because they've got the pier, which then throws the sand. So the sand gets pushed further out. If we didn't have like some of the jetties that we have and piers up and down the coast, you'd have a more natural coastline that would take care of itself. But we've screwed it up, and so
And the idea with the managed retreat is you spend so much money sanding, da-da-da-da-da-da, and it's temporary, or you could just have a homeowner say, maybe let's help you move somewhere else. That's the controversial part.
Del Mar.
That's the thing, you get a bunch of people living on the coast with a lot of money saying, no, thank you.
Well, they end up having to self-insure, so at some point.
Same thing as fire.
That's not the point.
No, I know it's not the point, but they will lose, like we lost our, you lose your fire insurance, you lose your homeowner's insurance, so they'll end up just losing and having to self-insure. So they'll lose their house and they can either rebuild it or they'll lose their house.
It is important to note that that's a safety element component, and we're working with the Coastal Commission now. Council approved it, and it takes Coastal Commission, unfortunately, multiple years to even start reviewing, so we are now working through some of the Coastal Commission comments, and some of them are relative to bluff setbacks and vulnerability assessments and those types of things. So that will be going back to City Council when and if we reach consensus with Coastal Commission. And they have all the control. They get to decide whether or not they will approve our documents. And I will say, to your point about living shoreline, I had the pleasure of going to a Coastal Commission hearing just last week up in the Bay Area, and we did bring up our Cardiff Living Shoreline, as we did plug that in there, that it is award-winning and something that we're very proud of. So
yeah, it's great.
Good time.
Yeah. There's another great project that got a lot of attention.
But that's a good
Ventura,
example of
too.
like what rewilding is in Encinitas. That is a prime example with the context of our city and our beaches being such a prized natural resource and a wonderful amenity. That's a great example.
And the lagoon.
And
oh my
dredging the
God,
lagoon.
the lagoon is like such
treasures in this county.
It's closed again?
Well, we're a couple
Any
minutes
day
after
now.
time, so I should probably wrap up. But there's this QR code. You can take this with you. The team will be looking for comments from all of you. And we've covered a lot of ground with your comments about fire risk and natural habitat and the MHCP and open space and what should be protected, climate, implementation. So it's really appreciate it. And I know Eric was sitting here just like writing it all up, and same with Jazz. So the team could go ahead and start thinking about it. So thank you for being here, and the comments need to be submitted by February 27th.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. I appreciate your time. And we'll get back. We'll get back to some of those specifics.
I think. And then I know you wrote a letter in support of the native project.
Let me get organized.
Which I appreciate it, because I've heard that a lot. It's nice to meet you.
I know you're busy, but
Chat.
I would love it because